let me just find it. And by the way, I'm using macOS as a PowerPoint framework. I don't know if you're supposed to do that. I just thought this makes sense. Yeah, so for Next.js, and this was essentially what blew my mind, was that I ran the wizard and it set up three configuration files, one for the client, one for the edge, and one for the functions, well, non-edge serverless part, let's say, classical backend. And this was it. Just having this wizard running, I did get a token that I needed to put in the deployment pipeline at the end, as I remember. And then that was it to get front end to back end tracing. It's really amazing. So it's essentially what made me love Sentry. I think the first time I tried it and I tried the wizard in the CLI, I thought this is, I'm not going back from this. I'm gonna use this product because it's an amazing experience. So yeah, that's essentially for Next.js. I think the wizard works in other languages as well, right, Sarah? And for most of them, you don't need to do much setup to get front end to back end tracing.
Yep.
Yeah.
We essentially designed our tracing such that for any projects that you have within your org, you'll be able to see those traces, those distributed traces, if you will. So be able to trace from front end to back end. We have SDKs for and support for over 100 languages and frameworks. So likely we are supporting whatever you are building in. For some, it is a lot easier to set up. We have these wizards that just make it ridiculously easy. We're working on more wizards for more languages and frameworks, but yeah, essentially all of it is fairly simple. All of it is essentially like 3 or 5 lines of code to set up, and then depending on where you want your spans and things, there's other things that you would do. But you can check out our docs for that. I'll put that in the chat here, and just basically click on your SDK that you want to look into and see what the support is there.
Yeah, you're gonna love it. If you haven't, I install this every few weeks when I do a new project, and that's the part that I'm most excited about, is to go through the wizard again because it's so cool. Yep. It's a great experience. Yeah, but speaking about setting up things, the next thing that I wanted to touch upon that helped me a lot, and also requires what we have here, 1, 2, 3, well, let's say 8 lines of code, and that is session replay. And this has really changed the way I think about debugging, but also about customer support. So I have quite a few apps, I think apps and tools and so on, maybe up to 10 these days. And a lot of the time I have to spend on customer support and asking them essentially what went wrong, because you would ideally want to see exactly what they've done to get to an exception, for example, or to get to a part that they don't understand. And before adding these 8 lines, you couldn't, and now you can. And I also do consultant freelance work, and I have heard this 1,000 times. People wishing to see exactly what the customer was doing, but instead you get some sort of email, you get some sort of contact, and you need to schedule a call, and you need to embarrassingly talk to that customer, and you will have to admit that you basically don't know what went wrong, and can you please show me what went wrong? So I'm on the other side of that, and I just think session replay is great, no matter if you're a small developer as I am, or a huge enterprise that has 20, 30 apps, interconnected services and so on. Is just as useful in both cases, because in both cases, when something goes wrong, you really wish you'd like to see what went wrong. So I have a couple examples here of just things that happened to me that I was really happy to fix in 5 minutes or so, just because of the session replay showed me exactly what went wrong. So this is one of them. There's a component explorer, and this one contains about 200 different components, and you can filter, you can do all sorts of things. So really it's client heavy, and I don't know exactly what you've been doing here. And sometimes when you interact with these or you try to copy something, this thing can fail for various reasons. Some of them are integrated directly with GitHub, so I don't even own the code. So things can go wrong just because people are not, or people have updated something in a repository that I am not aware of. That's one example, and the other example is quite similar. There are a number of templates, and throughout these templates, you can enter something called a thief mode, and you interact with the elements, and then you can copy any of these elements and view the code. And you can imagine how many of these it could be and how hard they are to actually spot when they go wrong across so many different templates. So one day I get this email saying that there are 3 new alerts, and then that I have a request failed with a status of 500, which can be anything really. It could be sometimes things go wrong in the serverless world, believe it or not, and things can just fail. But the interesting part about this that I noticed at the time is that I have a view replace button. So obviously that's the thing that I'm most curious about in this case. So if you press on it, you go to a page like this, and it's going to be so cool. And you see exactly where the user was clicking with the mouse and what went wrong. You see the error. Now there's one thing here. You can choose to replace text and sensitive information with stars. So that's why it's looking a little bit geeky, I guess, nerdy would be the word I would say. However, you see everything in here, and you have the ability to see the full replay. So if you thought this was cool, this usually is enough to identify what the bug was, because you get a pretty good indication visually where the user was and what they were clicking on. But if you press on the full replay, this is when it gets really crazy. You have a number of options here. You actually get a lot more before the thing that went wrong actually went wrong, and you can see breadcrumbs of what is happening, what the user was doing. And this is, at a level of detail that you cannot really get with console log. You can see as the user was getting, what errors the user got, and you see I have spotted some other errors here, not only the network one, and each of the DOM elements that they were pressing. And not only that, you see a full console, and you see exactly what happened in that error, and you see the network. And this is similar to what you see in the browser. This is pretty much as getting in the shoes of the user and replaying through what they've done, including the network, and figuring out what went wrong. So if I go for the request here, I see, oh, there's the 500. I'll make this a bit smaller. And then you can see, all right, what was the request? You can see all the data that you've sent, and even the response. If you need to configure that though, as far as I remember. Yeah, and that's because there might be sensitive data there, so you want to allow certain URLs if you want to see the body. But in this case, I already got enough. And tying it back together into the debuggability and ability to dig deeper into what went wrong, you also have a trace, as I mentioned. And let me make this a bit bigger here. And you can see the same thing that we saw in the performance trace pretty much. You can see that this user tried 4 times to do the same operation, and you can see how it failed. And then you can even navigate to that event and see a full trace view. And then we're back to the familiar ground. And this is, again, front end to back end. You can see that this is on the server, and this is on the client side. And I did nothing to really enable this. This came out of the box with the wizard. And finally, you can also, if you're really at this point, you got so much information that it would be pretty impressive to not find the issue. But if you don't, you can actually navigate to the issue, and it will show you the exact line of code that has failed, which is this one here. So realistically, you have everything you need to fix this, and you don't even need to bug the user. And what has happened to me in a couple of cases is if I'm at the desk and I get one of these emails coming in, and I just take a quick peek, if it's a 5-minute fix like this one, I would make the fix and push to production, and then in the meantime, I would get an email from a customer, and I can't explain you. It's Sarah, when you write back and you say the issue has already been fixed,
Oh my
you don't have
gosh.
anything to worry about. That is the best feeling in the world. And just for that, and for the 8 lines that it takes to to get the session replay on, I can't recommend it enough. So.
And you can
Yeah.
actually, so there's a couple things with both session replay and Sentry in general. So Dan showed that we obfuscate pretty much all text and image data right out of the box when it comes to replays. You can actually change that though. You can not obfuscate all that data. So if you know for a fact that there isn't private data, personally identifiable information, PII, whatever word you want to use, if you know that that is not private information, then you can unobfuscate certain things. We do this because we are a privacy first company, and all the obfuscation happens on the client. So we don't even get that data onto Sentry servers before we obfuscate that. And then also when you are in that issue view, I mean, even in this view, but when you are in that issue view, you can see the users that it's affecting. Obviously, like, you probably don't want to get all of the people, but if you are capturing user email, then you will get that if they're logged in, and you can kind of see, okay, these users are really affected, and so maybe you even proactively reach out and say, we've encountered this issue, we've already resolved it, and people are like, wow, I didn't even get a chance to complain yet.
Yeah, that's an even better approach, where you're the one sending the email first, and
Yes.
I didn't realize it's supposed to work that way, but thank you.
Exactly. And then you can see kind of on the right-hand side, it shows, how many people that it's been affecting, how many times this error has shown up in the last 24 hours, last 9 days, the last time it was seen, which release it was in, the first time it was seen, which release it was in. And we do have some automation that'll help with that you can kind of set up, and or that we will kind of suggest to you to say, hey, this person is the code owner for this code. And this is the likely commit that caused this issue, and so maybe you want to tag that person in it, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, right. That's also a fantastic feature, that you can tie it back to a commit or to a release, and sort of figure out. Yeah, I still think the amount of information that you get will help you nail down this issue in minutes, in 99% of the cases. And I love it for that, because what's really annoying here is having to match this with the part of code that actually failed. And you can have a pretty complicated setup sometimes. You can have a lot of serverless functions, you can have a lot of dependencies, and it's hard to understand where in that chain the issue has happened. And this one, I haven't encountered one of those yet. Once I set this up, I always get the the exact place where something happened, and I can fix it within minutes. So,
And that's,
but
you know, our goal is that you aren't spending a lot of time in here. So, and that's why you'll see a lot of that repetition. So if you start from an email from a session replay and that, you know, you open it up and you see the trace and then you go to the full trace view and then you see the issue and then you click into the issue, you'll notice that on this issue, you can go to the full trace again. The session replay is down below. Because depending on the type of issue, how you've set up alerts, how you and your team work, you know, you may be entering at different places, and we want to make sure you have all that data. Bruno
correct.
asked, will all the errors be related to a session replay, or can you get errors without a session replay? Yeah, that's a great question. No, you do not have to have a session replay with errors. So Sentry started as tracing, you know, like tracking and alerting to errors. So all errors within your app will likely be caught by Sentry, and you'll have issues just kind of listing all of those. Same with performance issues. So if we're detecting any errors or performance issues, all of that will be captured. Session replay and kind of these other features are beneficial for additional context and ability to prioritize. But no, you do not have to have a session replay with every single error.
Yeah, yeah. To add to that, you can also tweak that and reduce the number of session replays or increase them. There are these two sample rate things that you can configure when you set it up. I haven't touched that myself. I think the defaults worked fine, but
And then you
it's
can see
possible
right
to
there the
yeah,
mask all text and block all
right.
media. You can change those, and there's additional in the docs kind of configurations for what you do want to mask or block.
Yeah, yeah. So what I really, taking a step back, and what I really liked about session replay is the reality is that users, they don't really take the time to even report these. Maybe 1 in 5 users will be writing an email because they're angry, but the other 4, they don't even write the angry email. They just move on maybe to a competitor, or they just close it down and never use it again, which is a shame. And what this has done to me is made me realize I have quite a few paper cuts, things that go wrong in places that I didn't know they go wrong, and
Mhm.
none of the customers have said that things are wrong, perhaps because they don't even know how a thing should work sometimes, or you just think, oh, maybe it's my phone because I use it on a phone and it's not working well there, or maybe it's an intermittent issue and I'll just try again later, and they never do.
Mhm.
And this really helped me improve the quality of the product and reduce these bugs that I would otherwise not be aware of or not really. It's also, I'll be honest, sometimes when I get an error, I think, is it really important to fix right now? But when you
Mhm.
have the session replay and you see exactly where it happens, you suddenly get motivated to fix that error because you realize it breaks a part of the UI flow. So imagine this in a checkout flow, where
Yeah.
perhaps a part where you put your address is not working correctly, or your zip codes, getting cleared when you do a certain action. That type of stuff can mean the customer completes the purchase or not. And being able to see that, because you can't really get the customer to replay a payment, right? There's certain situations where you just can't get this. You have to do guesswork and do a code fix in the blind, as they say, and hope that that solves the issue. So seeing exactly what the customer did, I think it's just worth its weight in gold. It's just fantastic, and I know a lot of people wish for this. They just don't know it's possible yet somehow.
Yeah. Someone did ask on YouTube, because we did get that working just on a different link, but they said that they used the wizard to send a test error and verified their dashboard. Do they need to update all of their on clicks in their app with Sentry to get that breadcrumb data? Did you have to do that, Dan?
No, it's all automatically done. So just sit back and relax, and when
Yep.
something goes wrong, you're gonna get it. That's the beauty of it. It's all, it's all automatic.
Yep.
So I think the tracing part, just to clarify, you do need to set that up because that usually happens in a backend process where, it's pretty difficult for Sentry or any other piece of software for that matter to break things down into chunks because ultimately you need a human to reason about the
Yep.
code and to say, okay, this is a significant chunk of work that we should wrap in a span so we see the performance. But for everything else and for exceptions and for click events, I showed you the breadcrumbs.
Mhm.
That is automatic. You don't have to do anything to get all of that data. You don't need any click events. It's the config files that you get as part of the wizard is all that you need. And you don't even need to manually tweak those. I haven't. It's just the defaults are working
Yep.
fine.
Yep. Yeah, again,
Yeah.
the goal is, help you as a developer get back to being more of an engineer and not just, you know, coding for coding's sake. So yeah, just one of our teammates or one of my teammates, Lazar, he recently did a whole series on clean architecture and the benefits of thinking about the architecture before you build, so that way when you do go to instrument it with things like tracing or even just debug in general, it's a lot easier to kind of separate those blocks out. So yeah, awesome.
Yeah. Um, yeah, there were a couple other questions, and I think also what are the best practices here and some limitations. I
Mhm.
I think some gotchas here are, which were gotchas for me. If you handle the exceptions yourself, so if you have a try catch block, that's when you actually need to make a custom call to log something in Sentry if you want, because Sentry it will get all the uncaught exceptions. But if you caught the exception, you're not going to see an error in Sentry. So that's a bit of an interesting thing for me because you would think that after you run the wizard, everything seems to work. But then the more you handle exceptions in your code, then the fewer things you'll see in Sentry. And maybe that's fine. I guess when you handle the exception, you don't want to see it in Sentry anymore in some cases, but in other cases, you want to see if there's an escalation, if you get a lot of those all of a sudden. So in that case, it still makes sense to add some custom collection or use Sentry's APIs to send. You can send a lot of things. You can even send an entire file if you
Mhm.
want. I do this for big configuration. You can attach a document to the logs and have all the debugging information you want, or just let it collect its own things. It's pretty much out of the box. You get pretty much what you need to solve the issues, and then as you get a bit smarter on handling these exceptions, you can start adding custom things. But I actually like keeping things lean.
Yep. Yep. Is there any possibility of logging without the Sentry replay option? I think this is kind of similar to the question earlier. So it's not technically logging, it's just error capturing and error monitoring. But yes, you do not have to have session replay for that. If you just install Sentry, install the SDK in your project, we will capture all the uncaught errors and do some performance monitoring if you've set that up. It's just a couple lines of code, and our kind of docs and our initial kind of setup wizard installation that will walk you through a lot of that initial stuff, and we'll share some resources with you on that as well. And we have a Discord, so you can join us on Discord. .gg/Sentry and ask questions there as well. Robin asked if it's only on a try catch that you do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's essentially when you are handling the exception yourself, right? So if you are doing kind of like an example of when you might want to make sure that Sentry is capturing something, even though you've captured it, is if you're like, okay, if this error is out, I'm gonna, gracefully handle this exception, but it's still a problem, maybe, right? And so you might want to still kind of address that. For example, if for some reason your call to the database is not returning correctly, or there's just kind of an error there, and you gracefully handle it with a catch that says, oh, this is now sold out, but it's not sold out. You probably want to know about that, right? You want to know that graceful handling happened, but that potentially there's an error for you to take a look at. And between both instrumenting it yourself and setting up alerts to make sure that you aren't being alerted for every single, tiny thing that maybe doesn't matter. We don't set that up from the beginning to be alerted that way. But thinking about kind of how you want to be alerted, who should be alerted. The way we use it at Sentry a lot is through Slack alerts. So we have channels that get tagged. And so an alert will go to a channel and it'll give you a lot of the details of what's going on.
Yeah, fantastic.
I wanted to share a couple of things as we're kind of heading out. Feel free to continue asking a couple questions here as we do this. But so we've got, I just wanted to kind of give a quick overview here. These are some of the things that we hope you know about Sentry at the end of this. So tracing performance issues and errors with our trace view allows you to do that multiple, distributed tracing, that multi-service application from front end to back end and back without losing that context. So definitely check out our trace view. Today we showed a little bit about session replay, which is that video-like reproduction of user sessions. But in addition to that, we have a feature called user feedback, which is a literal like 3 lines of code that you add to your config file. It adds a widget to your web app, allowing your users to be able to give feedback directly. And that widget comes with a replay as well. So it'll attach to all of the things that you've seen Dan kind of present today. So those are great for if there isn't an actual code error being triggered, but rather it's just, let's say a dead click or something, or, your users are just using your application in ways that you never expected them to, or you have a typo, who knows?
That's such a underrated feature too, because
Yeah.
actually a lot of people don't know about the user feedback widget. It's also a few lines of code to get it in there. And the next best thing you can do, except handling errors, of course, is to have an easy way for users to report them. This is a no-brainer. I've added this to my apps as well. And I think 6 months ago it didn't have spam protection, and now it does, and it's been working very well for me. It's I'm getting a lot of relevant feedback, and it's not only issues. Sometimes it's features as well, or some sort of request to add something. And also seeing the recording of what they did before that is kind of interesting, because you can get in the mind of the user and really understand the request better. Okay, so they were doing this before they requested this feature. Oh, okay, I get it. And maybe it's something else you need to implement than they requested, but you have the full context for it.
Exactly. And then, of course, what kind of tech company would we be if we don't do AI? However, because we aren't trying to like force you into our app for longer periods of time, and we are trying to just help you get in, resolve your issue, get out, we do kind of try to really prioritize where we are putting in our AI. So we've got a couple of things. Here's 2 examples of how we're leveraging AI. One is with autofix. So within your issues, we use all of the context and data that we have on the issue that occurred and help you generate a fix, and could potentially even open up a pull request for your review to see if that, like if it's a fairly easy, straightforward fix, then maybe our AI can do that. And then it's just a matter of you using your human brain, making sure that makes sense for your app, the issue that you're seeing, and then merging that in. And then we also earlier this year launched one of the first Copilot extensions alongside Microsoft and GitHub. So the Sentry Copilot extension lives inside of VS Code. It's and it allows you to put in a link to a Sentry issue. So let's say Dan is the one who's working on the code, and I'm, in GitHub trying and in Sentry trying to just make sense of all of the application and make sure that everyone's happy. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this issue is a high priority thing. I send Dan the URL to the Sentry issue, and then he can just go into Copilot, put in that link, and it'll give him an overview. And then he can ask regular Copilot, hey, how would I fix this if he needs help there? So
And
again,
then
trying to keep
regular Copilot will actually know the context of the code base.
exactly.
Yeah, okay, that's
Exactly.
pretty cool. I need to
Yep.
try this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty great. And essentially just trying to keep developers where they are naturally, right? So if we're
Mm,
already going to be inside of VS Code, then why do I have to leave and come
yeah.
back? So,
That's why I think ChatGPT isn't working very well for me, because the
yes,
context switch is very difficult going back
yes,
and forth. So having the thing, if possible, on the line that I am, then
yes. I
that's
highly recommend trying out Copilot, even just that inside of VS Code. You can highlight a section of code and say like, what is wrong with this? And it'll just it knows the context, and it's like, oh, you should probably do this, blah 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 blah, and it's pretty great. I love it. We do have a couple links here for you. The first one is if you want to try Sentry. We do have a number of different plans. You can self-host Sentry if that's your jam. We have for you indie developers. I think Dan, you might be on our, or at least started on our developer plan, which is free. But Sentry grows with you. So whether you're an indie developer kind of building on your own, or you have a small team, we have a fairly low price point for that, or you're a larger business or an enterprise business, we will grow with you with whatever size of team and applications you have. Um, the second link is just to our blog in general, and the third link is Dan. It does not work for Sentry. I forgot. I didn't actually properly introduce you, Dan. But Dan is an indie developer building a number of amazing applications, including Shapixin. He's also the co-host of the Morning Maker Show. So if you haven't checked out that podcast, I'm gonna throw it in the chat here
Mm.
right now. But you should definitely check out that podcast. And we met Dan essentially because he tweeted out the fact that he had been struggling with an error and then finally gave up and was like, okay, I'm going to spend the whole day installing Sentry. Let me see what the issue is. And then the installation took him a matter of minutes. And he was like, oh,
Yeah.
why didn't I do that sooner?
Yeah,
So yeah,
exactly,
so he wrote a
exactly.
number of
Yeah.
blog posts for us, kind of just on his authentic experience, and that's what this workshop's about. So those blog posts are there.
Yeah.
So
I turned from Sentry skeptic to the biggest fan, essentially, and that was just without anyone pushing me, just for experiencing the product, essentially. So,
yeah,
well, thank you so much for building this.
yeah. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Both of our Twitter handles are there. You can continue to engage with us and ask us questions. If you're on the Zoom, a recording will be sent out. If you're on YouTube, I understand that the beginning got cut off, so we will have a recording available on YouTube shortly. But yeah, thank you so much, Dan, for giving us kind of your authentic experience with how you leverage Sentry to be able to debug more effectively.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Always nice to talk about something I love. So thank you so much for having me. I had a blast, and I'll be sure to highlight more things in the future. It's part of my stack now, so
Yes.
I'm
I
not
love
going
it.
anywhere.
I
Yeah.
love it. Awesome. Oh, wait, there was one Q&A. Do I need a team sub for distributed tracing across Next.js and Nest.js API? No, you do not need a team subscription for tracing. You could do that on a developer plan.
Mhm. Pretty
Awesome.
generous plan, I have
Got
to
one
admit.
last question in there. Just want to make sure everyone's got theirs. Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dan. We're going to go ahead and end this this stream, and thank you all again for joining.
Thank you so much, Aran,